The land stretched wide and endless, a sea of grass rolling beneath the bright sun. Wind carried the smell of dust and dry earth, whispering across the plains. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled high above, its shadow sliding silently over the ground below. To anyone watching, it looked peaceful. But for the Apache people who lived here, peace was only a memory fading too quickly. Their world was under threat, and every sunrise brought new fear. The soldiers had come first, riding in with their shiny boots and heavy rifles. Behind them came settlers with wagons full of goods, hungry for land and water. The rivers that once belonged only to the Apache now had fences near them. The open hunting grounds had been cut down into farms. And slowly the tribe found themselves with less food, less space, and fewer choices. The young woman of the tribe knew all this too well. She was strong, her back straight and her eyes sharp, but inside she carried the heavy weight of her people's suffering. She had watched children cry from hunger, elders grow weaker each day, and proud warriors return from battles with wounds that would never fully heal. She had seen her own father buried beneath a hill after a raid, his blood spilled in defense of his people. She had no time for fear now. She carried too much responsibility to allow herself that weakness. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and painted the sky red, she slipped away from camp. Her moccasins moved quietly over the dirt and her braid swung behind her as she walked. She was searching, not for food, not for water, but for something else. Something her people could not give her anymore. Help. Far beyond the Apache camp, at the edge of the open plains, there lived a cowboy. He was a drifter, a man with no real ties to any land or any people. His horse was his only companion and his rifle his only shield. He had once worked for ranchers, then for traders, then as a scout for soldiers, but he never stayed long in any one place. Some said he carried too much anger in him. Others said he carried too much sorrow. Whatever the truth was, he lived by his own rules, sleeping under the stars, never trusting anyone fully. The Apache woman had heard of him. A man who moved between two worlds, sometimes with the white settlers, sometimes near the tribes, but never belonging to either. Some said he was dangerous. Others said he was simply tired of fighting battles that were not his own. She knew if she approached him, he might turn her away. He might laugh at her, or worse, betray her. But her people were running out of time. Desperation made her bold. She found him near a dry riverbed, his horse drinking the last muddy water that clung to the edges. He was tall, his face half hidden under the shadow of his hat. His coat was worn and his boots carried the dust of many miles. He looked up when he heard her approach, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against a rock. "You followed me," he said, his voice low, calm but sharp like the edge of a blade. The woman did not flinch. She had faced soldiers with bayonets and riders with torches. This lone cowboy did not scare her. She met his eyes, her voice steady. "I came to ask for your help." The cowboy studied her for a long moment. He had seen women beg for food before, seen them plead for protection, but this woman was different. Her eyes did not carry the look of someone begging for her own life. They carried the fire of someone begging for many lives at once. "My people are dying," she said. "The soldiers push us, the settlers take our land. Soon there will be nothing left for us. No food, no water, no future." She paused, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. Then she spoke the words that shocked him. "Save my tribe, and I will give you strong offspring." The cowboy blinked, surprised. He had heard many strange bargains in his life, but never one like this. His mouth twitched almost into a laugh, but he saw her eyes and stopped. She wasn't joking. She wasn't trying to trick him. She was dead serious. "You're asking me to fight your war," he said slowly. "Why me? I ain't no savior." "Because you know both worlds," she replied quickly. "You know how they fight. You know their rifles, their ways. You walk between them, but you belong to neither. That makes you stronger than any of us." The cowboy leaned back against the rock, silent. Part of him wanted to send her away. Why risk his life for strangers? Why take on a fight that wasn't his? He had enough scars already. But another part of him, buried deep, the part he thought had long died, stirred at her words. She waited for his answer, her face calm but her heart racing inside. She had laid everything bare, her pride, her future, even her own name. If he said no, she would return to her people with nothing, and soon they would vanish like smoke in the wind. Finally, the cowboy spoke again. "Offspring, huh? That's a mighty strange bargain." His voice was rough but not unkind. He pulled his hat lower, hiding his eyes. You're either brave or desperate. Both, she answered without hesitation. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft snort of the cowboy's horse and the distant cry of the hawk overhead. The cowboy's hand moved slowly, not for his rifle, but for his canteen. He took a long drink, then offered it to her. She accepted, her throat dry from the long walk. For the first time, his gaze softened as he watched her drink. She was young but not naive. She carried herself like someone who had already lived a lifetime of battles. Her offer was not about herself, it was about the survival of her people. And that, the cowboy realized, took more courage than most men he had ever met. When she handed the canteen back, he sighed. You're asking me to stand against soldiers, settlers, and maybe even bounty hunters. You know what that means? It means life for my people, she said firmly. Or death if I return alone. The cowboy rubbed his jaw. He had sworn never to fight for anyone again. He had walked away from wars, from camps, from all the blood and fire of the frontier. Yet here stood this woman, unshaken by danger, offering him something no one had ever offered before. Not gold, not land, but legacy. He felt the weight of her words pressing against the walls he had built around his heart. For the first time in years, he found himself unable to walk away. Finally, he nodded just once. I ain't promising victory, he said, but I'll stand with you. For now. The woman's lips parted in relief, though she did not smile. She only bowed her head in respect. It was enough. A spark of hope lit inside her, a spark she would carry back to her people. And the cowboy, watching her turn toward the setting sun, felt something he thought he had buried long ago, the pull of purpose. The land was still wide and endless, the sky still painted in fire, but for the first time in many seasons, the horizon seemed less empty. Something new had begun. The night after their meeting was quiet, but neither the Apache woman nor the cowboy found sleep easily. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, scattered across the dark sky like burning coals. The cowboy sat by his fire, turning over her words again and again in his mind. He had agreed to help, but doubts gnawed at him. Could one man truly make a difference for an entire tribe? Could he stand against soldiers and settlers alike? His life had always been about survival, not about saving others. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw the woman's steady gaze, heard her unshaken voice. That fire she carried, it was not something he could ignore. The Apache woman, meanwhile, walked back through the tall grass toward her people's camp. Her steps were heavy, but her heart was lighter than it had been in months. For the first time, she carried hope instead of despair. She had not returned with food or weapons, but she had returned with something greater. A man who knew the enemy's ways. She did not yet know if he would truly stand by his promise, but she had no time to doubt. Her people were waiting. When she entered the camp, whispers followed her. Children peered at her from behind tents of hide and brush. Elders raised their weary eyes, and warriors, tired and wounded, sat in silence. The tribe had grown used to disappointment. They expected her to come back with nothing, as always. But when they saw the spark in her eyes, some of them straightened. For the first time, she looked not just like a daughter of the tribe, but like a leader. The next morning, the cowboy rode into their camp. Dust clung to his coat, and his horse's breath came out in clouds of steam in the early chill. The Apache warriors stiffened, hands moving toward their bows and rifles. But the woman stepped forward quickly, raising her hand. He is with us, she said firmly. The cowboy slid off his horse, feeling dozens of eyes burning into him. Suspicion was everywhere. To the Apache, he was still an outsider, a man of the very people who had brought them so much pain. He understood their mistrust. He didn't blame them for it. He tied his horse loosely and waited, saying nothing. He had no intention of forcing himself on them. If they wanted him gone, he would leave. But the woman spoke again. He knows their ways. He knows their weapons. He has agreed to help us. One of the older warriors stepped forward, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with years of war. His voice was sharp. Why should we trust him? He is not Apache. He is their kind. The cowboy met the man's gaze without flinching. I ain't their kind, he said simply. His voice was calm, steady. I've seen enough of them to know I don't belong with them. I've lived by my own rules for a long time. But I'll tell you this, if you want to fight soldiers, you can't do it the way you've been doing. They'll crush you every time. I can show you how to fight back. If you'll have me. The camp was silent. The words hung in the air like smoke. Some of the warriors frowned, others exchanged doubtful looks. But the woman's eyes did not waver. She turned to her people. We have tried our way. We have bled, we have buried, we have lost. If we do not change, we will be gone. This man brings us knowledge. If we want to live, we must learn. Slowly, the old warrior gave a short nod. It was not approval, not yet, but it was permission, and that was enough. The days that followed were filled with change. The cowboy began teaching them new ways to fight. He showed them how to use the land not just as home, but as a weapon. Don't face soldiers head-on, he told them. They've got numbers, they've got rifles, they've got horses. You come at them like shadows. Hit fast, disappear faster. Make them fear the ground they walk on. He walked them through ambush drills, showing them how to place traps where cavalry would ride, how to fire from cover instead of out in the open, how to use the rhythm of soldiers marching against them. He showed them how to shoot at supply wagons instead of wasting bullets on heavily armed men, how to scatter troops by striking at night instead of day. At first, many of the warriors resisted. They were proud, and pride made it hard to accept that a stranger could teach them how to fight. But when the cowboy set up a mock raid, splitting the tribe into two groups, his tactics proved themselves. The attackers rode in hard and fast, but they were caught in a trap of smoke, fire, and hidden shooters. In less than an hour, the battle was done. The tribe began to see that his ways, though foreign, could save them. Meanwhile, the Apache woman stayed close, always watching. She was not just a messenger. She was part of every lesson, every plan. She fought beside her people during training, and when doubt rose among them, she was the first to speak in the cowboy's defense. He is not here for himself, she reminded them. He is here because I asked him. He is here because we must survive. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of drills, the cowboy and the woman spoke quietly. The camp around them hummed with life, children playing, elders muttering prayers, warriors sharpening blades. You speak for me when they doubt, he said, his eyes fixed on the flames. You speak for yourself when you teach, she answered. They see what you can do. They just need time. The cowboy gave a short chuckle. Time. That's the one thing I've never had much of. He fell silent again, staring into the fire. I never figured I'd end up standing with anyone again. Thought I'd be drifting forever, but here I am. The woman's voice was soft, steady. Sometimes we don't choose the road. The road chooses us. For a moment their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, an understanding passed between them. It was not love yet, not even friendship. It was respect, the kind that only grows in fire and hardship. As the days turned to weeks, the tribe began to move with new purpose. Their warriors grew sharper, their defenses stronger. The children laughed more often, as if they could feel hope returning to their camp. Even the elders, who had seen more loss than they cared to remember, admitted that something had changed. Still, danger loomed close. The soldiers were restless, their commanders determined to break the Apache spirit once and for all. Word came from scouts that another attack was being prepared. This time it would not be a raid. It would be a full campaign to drive them out. The woman and the cowboy stood together as the news spread through the camp. Fear stirred again, but this time it was mixed with resolve. The tribe was no longer the same as it had been. They were ready to fight in ways the enemy had never expected. The cowboy looked at the woman, his face grim but steady. It's coming. When it does, there won't be any turning back. She met his gaze without flinching. Then we will stand. Together. For the first time, the cowboy allowed himself a small smile. He tipped his hat almost like a salute. Together it is. The firelight flickered across their faces, two figures from different worlds bound by a promise. Around them, the Apache sharpened arrows, checked rifles, and whispered prayers. The storm was coming, and when it broke, everything would change. The morning broke heavy with silence. The air carried no birdsong, only the faint sound of wind bending the grass. The Apache camp stirred uneasily, every heart beating faster than usual. Scouts had returned in the night with grim news. The soldiers were on the move, and they were coming in numbers greater than ever before. The cowboy rose early, his face calm, but shadowed with worry. He had seen armies before. He knew what it meant when the dust of marching boots clouded the horizon. He saddled his horse and checked his rifle, though deep down he wondered if even his knowledge would be enough. Against so many, survival seemed impossible. Still, when he looked around and saw the faces of the tribe, children clutching their mothers, warriors sharpening arrows, elders whispering prayers. He knew there was no turning back. The Apache woman walked to him, her braid hanging loose over her shoulder. Her eyes carried no fear, only resolve. "They are ready," she said softly. "Ready as they can be," he replied, glancing toward the hills where warriors had hidden supplies and laid traps. "Once it starts, there ain't no stopping. You know that?" She nodded firmly. "We know." The cowboy tightened his grip on his rifle. He admired her strength. She stood like a flame against the wind, refusing to bend, refusing to break. By midday, the horizon darkened with dust. The soldiers rode in neat rows, their rifles gleaming under the sun, their flags snapping in the wind. Wagons rattled behind them, carrying supplies and ammunition. To the untrained eye, it was an unstoppable wall of power. But to the cowboy, it was also a machine full of weaknesses. He had spent weeks teaching the Apache how to see those cracks. Now was the time to test them. The first shots rang out when the cavalry reached the narrow canyon leading toward the camp. Hidden warriors fired from the ridges, their arrows whistling through the air, their rifles cracking in echoes. Horses reared, soldiers shouted, and the perfect formation shattered. Smoke bombs rolled down the slopes, filling the canyon with choking haze. The soldiers coughed and stumbled, unable to see. "Now," the cowboy barked, his voice carrying like thunder. From the rocks, Apache warriors surged, striking with sudden fury. They did not fight to match strength with strength. They fought like shadows, hitting fast, then disappearing back into the land. Soldiers fell, their shouts drowned by the war cries echoing through the canyon. The cowboy fought beside them, his rifle steady, his movements sharp. He had trained himself for years to stay alive, and now every skill was poured into the fight. He fired from cover, moved with purpose, never wasting a bullet. Twice he saved a warrior by stepping into the open to draw fire. His hat nearly shot clean off his head. The Apache woman was no less fierce. She carried a bow and a small rifle, but more than that, she carried the spirit of her people. She moved swiftly, guiding children and elders to safer ground, then returning to the front to fight alongside the warriors. Every time the cowboy saw her in the chaos, his chest tightened with both fear and pride. The battle raged on as the sun climbed high. Dust, smoke, and screams filled the air. At times it seemed the soldiers would push through with sheer numbers. Their cannons roared, blasting apart rocks and sending shockwaves across the canyon. The cowboy was thrown to the ground by one explosion, his ears ringing. When he staggered back to his feet, pain burned along his side. He had been grazed by a bullet. For a moment the world swam before his eyes. He tasted blood, felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. But before he could falter, the Apache woman was there. She gripped his arm, steadying him, her voice fierce. "Stand, do not fall now. They are watching you." Her words cut through the haze. He looked around and saw the eyes of warriors on him, waiting, drawing strength from his presence. If he fell, hope might fall with him. He straightened, ignoring the pain. "Keep firing. Don't let them through," he shouted, his voice rough but commanding. The tide turned again. Warriors struck the supply wagons, setting them aflame. Black smoke rose high into the sky, the fire spreading quickly. Soldiers panicked, scrambling to save what they could, but the flames devoured their food, their ammunition, their precious comfort. Without supplies, their campaign would falter. Still, the soldiers pressed hard. They were trained, disciplined, unwilling to accept defeat at the hands of those they called weaker. They regrouped, forming tighter lines, pushing inch by inch through the canyon. The fighting grew desperate. The cowboy reloaded his rifle with shaking hands, his body screaming with every movement. Around him warriors fell, their cries echoing. His heart pounded with rage and sorrow, but he pushed on. He had promised to stand with them, and he would not break that promise. The Apache woman fought at his side now, her arrows flying with deadly accuracy. She moved with grace, never hesitating, never backing down. At one point, when a soldier charged with a bayonet, she stepped forward and struck him down before he could reach the cowboy. He looked at her, breathless, and in that instant he realized she was more than brave. She was the very spirit of survival itself. The sun dipped lower, painting the battlefield in harsh light. The canyon floor was littered with broken wagons, fallen horses, and men who would never rise again. At last the soldiers began to falter. Their officers shouted, trying to rally them, but fear had seeped into their ranks. The shadows of the canyon seemed alive with enemies they could not catch. One final push from the Apache broke them. Warriors stormed from the ridges, their cries piercing the air. The soldiers turned, retreating in chaos, stumbling over one another to escape the death trap they had walked into. When the last of them vanished over the horizon, silence fell. The dust slowly settled, revealing the cost of victory. The cowboy leaned heavily against a rock, his side bleeding, his breath ragged. He looked around at the tribe, seeing both relief and sorrow. They had survived, but at a price written in blood. The Apache woman knelt beside him, her hands steady as she bound his wound with strips of cloth. He winced but did not pull away. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, no words were needed. They had faced fire together, and neither had broken. As the tribe gathered around, weary but unbowed, the cowboy felt something stir deep inside. He had come here as a drifter with nothing. Now he realized he had found something worth standing for. He had fought not for gold, not for pride, but for people who believed in him. The woman's voice rose clear and strong above the silence. "We have lived. We will continue to live. This is only the beginning." And though his body ached, the cowboy believed her. Against all odds, they had turned the tide. The battle was over, but their true journey had only just begun. The canyon was quiet after the battle, but it was not the kind of silence that brought peace. It was heavy, full of smoke, dust, and the soft cries of the wounded. The Apache tribe moved slowly among the rocks, gathering their fallen, tending to those who still breathed, and whispering prayers for the souls who had gone. The air smelled of burnt wagons and gunpowder, a reminder of the storm they had just survived. The cowboy sat against a rock, his side bandaged with cloth torn from his own shirt. Blood still seeped through, but the pressure kept him steady. His face was pale, but his eyes were alert, scanning the camp as if he could not stop himself from watching over them. He had seen battles before, too many to count, but this one was different. He had not fought as a lone drifter. He had fought as part of something bigger. The Apache woman moved tirelessly among her people. She checked the wounded, gave water to the children, and spoke to the warriors who sat slumped with exhaustion. When she finally came to the cowboy, her hands were stained with dirt and smoke, her face streaked with sweat, but her eyes still carried strength. She knelt beside him, her voice calm. "You should rest." "I'll rest when I see the soldiers gone for good," he muttered. His tone was rough but not unkind. "They are gone for now," she said. "We made them run. We lived." The cowboy gave a faint nod. He wanted to believe it was enough. But years of wandering had taught him that soldiers always came back. Yet when he looked into her eyes, he saw no fear, only determination. Somehow that steadied him more than the bandages. As night fell, the tribe gathered around small fires. They shared what little food they had, their voices quiet but steady. Children leaned against their mothers, eyes wide with questions they dared not ask. The elders spoke in low tones, recalling other battles, other losses, but tonight there was a difference. For the first time in many seasons, they had not been crushed. They had stood, fought, and survived. The old warrior who had doubted the cowboy before now approached him. His steps were slow, his face unreadable. The cowboy braced himself for harsh words, but instead the old man spoke with a surprising softness. "You fought with us. You bled with us. Today you are not an outsider." The cowboy blinked, caught off guard. He had never sought belonging, never asked for it. But hearing those words stirred something inside him he had long buried. He gave a short nod. "I did what I could." The old warrior touched his shoulder lightly. "Sometimes that is enough." Then he walked away, leaving the cowboy in thoughtful silence. Later that night, when most of the camp had gone quiet, the Apache woman returned to sit beside him. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that made her look both strong and gentle. "You kept your word," she said. "I only promised to stand with you," he replied. "Didn't promise I'd survive it." She gave a faint smile, though her eyes softened. "Yet you did. And because of you, many of us did too." The cowboy shifted uncomfortably. Praise was something he had never known how to accept. For years he had lived with nothing but his horse and his rifle, moving from place to place, belonging nowhere. Now these people spoke as if he mattered. It unsettled him, but it also warmed him in a way he didn't expect. The woman grew quiet, her gaze drifting to the stars above. "When I told you my words before about giving you strong offspring, it was not only a bargain. It was also hope. Hope that two worlds could join, that strength could be shared. I did not speak it lightly." The cowboy's heart tightened. He remembered that first meeting, her voice steady even as desperation burned in her eyes. Back then he had thought it a strange offer, maybe even foolish. But now, after fighting beside her, he understood. It had not been about her alone. It had been about the survival of her people, and about building something that could last beyond battles and blood. He looked at her, his voice low. "You're stronger than any warrior I've ever met. Stronger than most men I've known." She turned her eyes to him, calm and unwavering. Strength is born when there is no other choice. They sat in silence for a long while, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. For the cowboy, it was a silence he had not known in years. Not empty, not lonely, but shared. In the days that followed, the tribe worked to rebuild what they had lost. They buried their dead with ceremony, singing songs to guide them to the spirit world. They repaired shelters, gathered food, and checked the traps the cowboy had taught them to set. Though their bodies ached and their hearts carried sorrow, their spirits were not broken. Instead, there was a new fire in the camp, a quiet belief that they could endure. The cowboy, still healing from his wound, helped as best he could. He taught the warriors how to clean rifles properly, how to ration ammunition, how to set signals in case of another attack. The children followed him at a distance, whispering and laughing, as if he were some strange figure from a story. He had never been good with children, yet when one bold boy came close and asked shyly to touch his horse, the cowboy found himself nodding. The boy's laughter echoed through the camp, and for the first time in a long while, the cowboy smiled. The Apache woman watched all of this quietly. She saw how her people, once so suspicious of the stranger, now began to accept him. She saw how he carried himself, not as a man seeking power, but as one who carried a heavy burden of his own. And slowly she saw something else, the way her heart no longer felt alone when he was near. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, the tribe gathered again. The elders spoke of the battle, of how the spirits had guided them, of how courage had carried them through. Then the woman stood and addressed them, her voice clear and strong. "We live today because we stood together," she said. "We live because we changed. We live because we were not afraid to trust when trust seemed impossible." She paused, her eyes sweeping over the crowd before resting on the cowboy. "And we live because one man chose to fight with us even when he had no reason to. For that, he is no longer an outsider. He is one of us." The tribe murmured in agreement, nodding, some even raising their hands in respect. The cowboy sat still, his chest tightening. He had never belonged anywhere, never been called part of a people, and now these words struck deeper than any wound he had taken. That night, as the fires burned low and the stars filled the sky, the cowboy lay awake, staring upward. The woman's words echoed in his mind, and he realized something he had never admitted to himself before. He had not only saved them, they had saved him too, from loneliness, from drifting, from a life without purpose. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a place. And for the first time, he wanted to stay. The seasons began to turn slowly, carrying the memory of battle into the folds of time. The smoke that once hung over the canyon faded, and green began to return to the valleys where fire had scorched the ground. The Apache tribe, though scarred by loss, stood taller than before. They had not been destroyed. Instead, they had grown stronger. Their hearts were heavier, but their spirit was alive. The cowboy healed slowly, though the scar on his side never fully stopped aching. It was a constant reminder of the day he chose to fight not for himself but for others. At first he thought he might leave once he regained his strength. He had always been a drifter, never staying in one place long. But every time he prepared to ride away, something pulled him back, the laughter of the children, the respect in the warrior's eyes, the quiet presence of the woman who had first called on him. Life in the camp began to take on a new rhythm. The cowboy was no longer a stranger. He taught the men how to shoot straighter, how to defend their homes without wasting strength. He helped the elders repair wagons. He carried water for the women when the river was far, and he allowed the children to ride his horse when the work of the day was done. The tribe began to see him not as someone outside their circle, but as someone within it. The Apache woman remained at his side through it all. She had once spoken to him out of desperation, offering what little she had to save her people. Now her voice when she spoke to him was no longer desperate but steady, filled with quiet trust. She often walked with him to the ridges where they could see the wide plains stretching endlessly, and there they would talk of what had passed and what might come. One evening, As the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of red and gold, the cowboy stood beside her watching the horizon. His voice was thoughtful. "I used to think the land was nothing but emptiness, just miles to cross with no end. But standing here, it don't feel empty anymore." The woman's eyes softened. "It feels like home." He looked at her, surprised at how simply she had said it and yet how true it was. For years he had wandered with no place to belong. Now he realized he had found a place, not in the land alone, but in the people who had welcomed him, and in the woman who had seen something in him when no one else had. As time passed, stories of their battles spread. Other tribes heard of how the Apache had stood against soldiers and won. Some came seeking advice, others came with gifts of respect. The cowboy, though uncomfortable with the praise, shared what he knew. He taught them the same tactics he had given to the Apache, knowing that knowledge could be the shield that kept others alive. The children of the camp listened with wide eyes when the elders told the story of the canyon. They repeated the words of their mothers. How the cowboy had stood bleeding but unbroken, how the woman had fought beside him, how together they had turned the tide. Around the fires, the tale grew into legend, a story not of despair but of survival. The cowboy sometimes shook his head when he overheard the children's whispers. "Legend," he muttered to himself. "I'm just a man who got lucky enough to still be breathing." But deep inside, a quiet pride warmed him. He had lived a life where his name meant nothing, where his trail vanished with the wind. Now he was part of a story that would live longer than he ever could. One day, as the tribe gathered to celebrate the harvest, the elders called for silence. The old warrior who had once doubted the cowboy stood tall, his voice strong despite his years. "We faced death together," he said. "We buried our fathers, our brothers, our sons, but we are still here. And we are here not only because of our courage, but because a stranger chose to stand as one of us. He is no longer a drifter. He is family." The tribe raised their voices in agreement, their cheers echoing across the plains. The cowboy stood awkwardly at the edge, his hat pulled low, but the Apache woman stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm. She looked at him with quiet certainty, her voice carrying above the noise. "You are not alone anymore." Those words sank deeper into him than any bullet ever could. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of belonging, not as a burden but as a gift. Seasons turned again. The cowboy and the woman grew close, their bond forged not by promises of desperation, but by trust and respect. Together they walked the path of rebuilding, guiding the tribe toward a stronger future. When their first child was born, the camp filled with song and laughter. The elders blessed the baby, calling it a child of two worlds, destined to carry both strength and wisdom. The cowboy, holding the small life in his arms, felt a rush of emotions he could barely name. He had faced death countless times, but never had he faced something so fragile, so full of hope. The woman watched him quietly, her smile soft. "You see now," she said, "what I meant when I spoke those words." He nodded slowly, his voice thick. "Stronger than I ever dreamed." Years passed. The children of the cowboy and the Apache woman grew, running across the plains with laughter on their lips and fire in their eyes. They learned the ways of both parents, how to ride, how to fight, how to honor the land, how to carry themselves with courage. To the tribe, they were a sign that survival was more than a word. It was a future made real. The cowboy often sat by the fire at night, watching his children play, listening to the songs of the elders, and he would think back to the day when the woman had first approached him by the dry riverbed. He remembered her voice, steady and desperate, and he realized how far they had come. He had thought her promise was strange, almost foolish, but now he saw it for what it was, not a bargain, but a vision of life continuing against all odds. As the years stretched on, the story of that desperate plea became more than history. It became legend, told again and again to each new generation. The tribe called it the story of survival, the story of strength born from unity, the story of how two paths crossed and became one. The cowboy grew older, his hair touched with gray, his body carrying the marks of battles long past, but his heart was lighter than it had ever been. He was no longer the lonely drifter who wandered the frontier. He was a husband, a father, a part of something greater. One evening, as he sat beside the Apache woman watching the sun sink into the horizon, he spoke softly. "I used to think I'd die out there alone with no one to remember my name. But now, He looked at her, then at the children running nearby. Now I know I'll live on through them. The woman placed her hand over his, her eyes shining in the fading light. Our strength will live on through them. Our story will not be forgotten. And as the stars filled the sky once more, the cowboy felt a peace he had never known before. His journey, once aimless and empty, had found its end, not in loneliness but in legacy. The tribe he had saved him in return, giving him what he never thought he would have: a family, a home, and a place in the stories told around the fire for generations to come.